Welcome back, everyone. I'm the Bella Gamer, and we're back with a very interesting video this time. Sorry if I didn't get a video out a little bit earlier in the week. I was working on this one, and for good reason. Recently, Baldur's Gate 3 has released, and probably by this time, I'm sure a lot of you are tired of hearing about Baldur's Gate 3. It's everywhere. Everyone's absolutely talking about the game, and for good reason. It is a legitimately good game. But I think even more than being a good CRPG, it's the perfect example of how a tabletop session should be more or less set up. And I'm going to kind of go over it step by step and include some of the footage I have from my own games here to kind of give a visual reference. And maybe I'll even have something playing here in the background. But so first of all, what do I mean by it's good for TTRPGs? Well, first, it's based on D&D 5th edition. Granted, it's been tightened up a bit and a little bit better balanced. And of course, the max level is only level 12, so you never really get to the really ludicrous levels as far as what you can do with some magical effects. That's all well and good. It's good mechanically speaking, but that doesn't make it necessarily a good TTRPG. What it does well is, well, a lot of things. The character dialogue is good, but it's even better considering that each character, even though they come from vastly different backgrounds, have something to do with the narrative. Now, I'm not going to get into spoilers in this video other than what could be, considered spoilers for the end of chapter 1, which has been done all to hell on YouTube so far. But if you have not gotten that far in your game, you might want to click off as there might be some minor spoilers here in this video. With that warning, I'm going to start talking about what I mean. So, many of the characters come from very different areas, whether it's a Githyanki from not even this plane or the material plane, or, well, I guess maybe the planet. I'm not sure. I actually don't remember my lore that well. It's either not the material plane and they're from the astral sea, or they're from like outer space. In any regard, it's pretty foreign to the people of this world. Or a wizard from Waterdeep. Or many of the characters come from Baldur's Gate, but one was literally a conscript in the wars in hell by the fallen angel Zariel to fight, which is pretty cool. And you also have a character who is a worshiper of what's considered an evil god. Now, all these characters might have some conflicts, and those are things that you might have to contend with, but overall, all the characters are all inherently tied to the narrative. There's some aspect of the mission you're going on that is going to tie into each of the characters. For Shadowheart, who is a cleric of Shar, the entire second chapter almost deals a lot with Shar and their war with the Lezunites, I believe is the right term for them. Anyway, the Selenites, sorry it is, the Selenites from the Worshippers of Saloon. That's really interesting and really cool. There's also devils in play as you contact many devils throughout the game, which ties in Karlach, the warrior from hell that we mentioned before. There's even characters who are native to Baldur's Gate, like Will, who is a warlock who is the blade of the frontiers and is kind of like a local folk hero. On top of this, the game does a really good job of allowing each of these characters to have different levels of power and work all together. The little illithid worms, that the tadpoles that get put into your character's brain, it changes the rules for some of the characters. There's a vampire spawn known as Asterion who is able to go out in sunlight because the tadpole is kind of changing his body chemistry to allow him to avoid bursting in sunlight, which is pretty cool. But Will and Gale are both canonically high-level characters, being well over level 10, but the worms seem to be suppressing them for some unspoken reason as of this far into the game. For Gale's, it makes a lot of sense considering a condition he has, which I won't spoil here. But for Will, it's probably just a narrative tool. And of course, we have Shadowheart, who is a fledgling of the, clerics of Shar. So she is progressing naturally while everyone else kind of had to re-progress through. And of course, whatever character you're playing is probably similarly kind of going through their level of progression naturally. This is a really good way to bring all the characters together and offers some really ingenious solutions into what is overall a terrible trope in TTRPGs, where a powerful character some reason gets amnesia, forgets all their spells, higher level abilities, and has to like relearn how to do the game. This one, at least, the tadpoles are doing something physically to your character, which makes a lot of sense. And it's a really good reason for all these characters from different backgrounds to want to work together. They all want these tadpoles out of their heads because they don't want to become illithids. And because of that, you get unlikely alliances. Will is hunting Karlach until he finds out that Karlach's actually all not that bad. And that does have repercussions for him being a warlock, but still, it's something that allows them to work together. And since they all have these parasites inside of them that allow them to kind of connect together, it allows each of the characters to also get unique insights into each other's backstories through the game. Now, I'm not saying every game needs to have some kind of version of illithid parasites in your brain connecting the characters to make the game work, but what I'm saying is that Baldur's Gate 3 has done what many a GM fails to do, which is create very plausible and reasonable reasons for the characters to want to work together. And on top of that, it allows them the time to get to know each other so that by the time the issue becomes solved, they are not necessarily willing to leave the party quite yet. It's very powerful and it makes the game work really, really well. On top of the characters and the setup for the campaign, there's also the battlefields. You can look and see here that they have multiple dimensions. There's different types of environs, whether it's like wine on the ground or oil, and sometimes even you can get situations where there are cliffs that you can, knock an enemy off of to the abyss below. This is just a very powerful mechanic, and honestly, the game blends in environment into the combats just as much, and there's so many unique encounters in the game as well, many of which I don't even want to spoil for you, as the fun is discovering them for the first time. Now, along with very good encounter design with very good battlefield environments, there's also the approach that you can take to several situations. Now, I'm going to show invading the goblin camp that happens towards not necessarily the end of chapter 1, but the first major area of the game before you cause, you cause irreversible changes to the area if you were to proceed. So in this case, I'm going to go through 3 possible routes that you could go to do this particular setup. First is walking through the front door. Due to the setting and narrative, there's actually a strong possibility that you can, get along with the enemies. The enemy goblin camp treats you more or less as a neutral, non-aggressive target. Granted, many of the goblins don't necessarily show you respect until you start forcing them to using your illithid mind powers. Now, this might be considered the evil routes, and in some ways you can definitely side with the villains in this game. There is very different routes depending on whom you side with throughout the game, and depending on what kind of character you're playing, it can make a huge difference. If you're playing a character who's only out for themselves, well, you can very much do that. But if you're playing a character who's more maybe like on the good path but is willing to do some nefarious things, this is a great example. As going in through the front gate, you can talk to these enemies, remember these goblins for later, and you can make your way all the way into the enemy base. You can even talk to one of the enemy's main leaders, and you can kind of get a different perspective. They do genuinely care for each other, at least somewhat.
You stand before the goblin priestess in the temple while your minds brush against one.
Don't want to get intimate in front of the novices. Fair enough. Got some weird shadows in your head. Maybe I can help with that. Us true souls gotta look out for one another.
And you can get this character to seclude you into a room, as you can, as she is trying to understand you and is like, oh, you don't want to do anything like this out in public. I understand. Let's go to my private room. And well, then you can pick her up, throw her, and then shove her off a cliff, like I'm doing here. And it's really, really funny. And it's the thing of, you can take what appears to be the evil route, but you can double cross the enemies. No one knows my character did this, and I can go up, talk to anyone, and they're none the wiser. One of their leaders has been literally murdered, and they don't know. Now, obviously, of course, on this route as well, you can side with the villains, get new allies, lose some of your companions you've made up until this point. And I think that's really good. But there's actually many other ways you can go about doing this. For instance, there is an optional side route. Now, it's a lot more dangerous. As you can see here, you need to go all over to this cliff, and if you have a Featherfall potion or a scroll, preferably, as it does your whole team. Featherfall, by the way, really, really strong. You can just jump down to this cliff, cross a log, and enter in through this side cave here. Then you can burn away the webs and try to avoid the traps. I didn't quite do so successfully here, but sneak in, jump over this little chasm, and you can begin sneaking up. Remember those goblins we spoke to before? Well, now we can kill them without anyone knowing. They're far enough away from their allies that they're not going to see, and once we get done with this combat here, well, then we can possibly try to take out the rest of the opening area. And this, you can do all these small camps before you hit the actual stronghold and try to take them on by force. It's a very interesting route and one of the more, well, honest ways to get in. Granted, yeah, you're just killing people, sure, but if you don't want to side with the goblins and you don't want to deceive them as you find that dishonorable, this might be the route to go. And then there's actually another route. If you go up to the windmill near where the city is and you take another Featherfall jump down over to this little area, you can sneak in towards the back end of the area. What this allows you to do is to bypass some enemies, get a small heart attack as you nearly wake up one of these guards here who have drunk themselves silly and are now barely sober. And then you can go up to this wall here and you can actually bust it down with any kind of force damage. Now, I try to bust it down. This goblin wakes up. I do a persuasion to keep them asleep. All is fine. But if you make another noise, he's going to get angry and upset at you. And, well, I couldn't bust down the door with another Eldritch Blast here. And so we had a fight on our hands. And that wasn't quite what I wanted to do. So I reloaded. And I got to the area, I saved, and what I did was I actually killed these drunkards while they were sleeping. They automatically get critical. I used the barbarian who does the most damage. No one else knew. Then I could blast down the door with reckless abandon and get inside. And now you can see here we're over the rafters inside the base. This allows us to get anywhere inside the base, even all the way back to the enemy's main treasure room. If you have a character who's good at lockpicking, you can open the door, get into their treasure area, get some really good magic items and a good amount of gold, and then you can just leave the area. You can decide to take this whole area and decide, nah, I don't want to get involved. I'm out for myself. I just wanted to get the loot and get out. And you can go to the next area and pretty much the next chapter without engaging in any of the story here. Now, you might think that, well, maybe that just means that area doesn't matter. It does. For many things later on, solving what happens here is very important. And how you get to the end of the next area depends on really what you did in Chapter 1, which makes a lot of sense. Is it the route I would take? No, not necessarily, but it's a route that I think is fun, that it's viable. And there's a lot of different narratives you can go. Everyone who plays Baldur's Gate 3 has a unique way they can get through it. And I think this is something that we can take back to TTRPGs. As a GM, you should be thinking about different ways to approach a scenario. And even as a player, you should be looking for alternative ways that you can handle a situation. Can you side with certain factions in the city? Can you make allies? Can you sneak in through side areas? Are there ways that you can assassinate a big bad enemy without having to do all that much work? GMs are really bad about making the big bads of areas or like the chapter boss in a situation where you can't easily deal with them and you have to fight them straight on. Well, I think that is appropriate sometimes. Other times, it's really good if the players can do something ingenious to bypass the encounter or to just defeat the boss altogether. Let your players have this level of creativity, as Baldur's Gate shows that even if you play a very meta, high damage build, well, 2 of the routes I showed you through here don't even require doing damage by any means. I killed one of the area's bosses by throwing them off a cliff, and I'll tell you, in this goblin camp, all the main bosses can be dealt with in this way. It's actually kind of huge, and then you can just kill a few goblins, scurry up the ladder, and leave like you did before. It's so good, and I feel like TTRPGs need to understand that this is how they're meant to be played. And it's not even like the designers of the games. The designers just make the rules. It's the GMs and the players who really need to understand that your encounters, the explorability, is something that is very important to the experience. I've been having so much fun with Baldur's Gate, more fun than I ever really had in D&D 5e, even when I was playing in those games or running those games regularly. And obviously I moved to Pathfinder, and I think this game would be better with Pathfinder's rule sets, but despite having D&D 5e's rule set, which is one that I'm not particularly a fan of, I still thoroughly enjoy the game, and it makes me really like it. This is just a helpful insight, I feel, into what good campaign design is. Give your players a reason to work together that doesn't feel overly forced and can allow for diverse backgrounds. Make battlefields that are interesting, filled with all kinds of different height elevations, area effects, different things, allowing your players to push enemies off of cliffs and such. That makes really good game design. And make even your core area that you want the players to go through have multiple solutions and multiple answers, even allowing for them to get through some dungeons without going into combat once. That is what makes tabletop. The freedom to do what you can't do in many other kinds of games. Granted, with Baldur's Gate 3, now you have less of an excuse, as video games used to be a lot more regimented on how you could do things, but Baldur's Gate 3, and some of Valerian's other games as well, allow for a lot of dynamic ways of approaching situations, which I thoroughly enjoy. Hope y'all liked this video, and I feel like this is very important, as this is very topical for what's going on right now. So if you could all do me a favor and like the video, subscribe if you want to see more like this, but more than anything, share this with your friends. If you want your TTRPGs to reflect what you can do in Baldur's Gate, share this with your GM, share this with your players, and give everyone a good insight into what makes TTRPGs fun, because I believe Baldur's Gate 3 is doing that. Anyway, good luck with all your games. Leave the bad luck to me, and I'll see you all next time, if I can ever get away from Baldur's Gate. Anyway, bye. I think I'm going to go play it some more right now with my friends. Bye. Yeah.